Hello, sir. It's a great pleasure to have you here in our ongoing economic series that thematically we call it Beyond GDP. Generally, we try and not get into any specific issues for the simple reason it's not that the kind of learned speaker that we invite to this platform, it is not that they will not be comfortable. It's more from our viewers and particularly me as a person. I've never been a formal student of economics, and I want to just clarify this is a non-commercial initiative venture where we are more, primarily interested in understanding the transformation that Indian economy has been through in last few decades, and nothing like hearing from some of the most incisive, the learned brains, including our today's speaker, like Dr. Rajiv Kumar. And in a minute from now, I will get into the introduction phase, though he technically doesn't need an introduction to the audience, whether in India or overseas, but still more from a formality and protocol check, I'll do that. Ever since we started this program, the guests that we invited, so that included Mr. Subbarao, Mr. Sujit Balla, or even A.K. Bhattacharya, or most recently Mr. Mantek Singh. I hope you are liking the way the discussions are moving, the issues that are being picked up, and obviously there's no need for feedback on the speakers of this stature, because they've not just been part of the highest level of economic policy making, but even otherwise they continue to influence the opinions, the policy making, and even otherwise the general economic governance that draw inspiration from what they speak or what they've done. So it is in that context we are extremely grateful to have your support. However, there's a request that I would do that the speakers, if you can just out of good gesture, if you start subscribing to this platform, it is not for anything else, but it's more for acknowledge the kind of work that is being done in terms of hosting this events, and more than that, the very high profile guests that they're here on our invitation, and it's just that sharing the thoughts just for our benefit, so that we get an opportunity to hear some of the issues that they have been closely part of, or they have observed their views. So therefore, it is in that context, it's only useful that, or rather, my request would be if you can support by way of just subscribing to this channel, so that we continue to kind of have this program relentlessly. So with this, also invite once again Dr. Rajiv Kumar. We are extremely honored to have you here, sir. He is a renowned economist. He is a former vice chairman of Niti Aayog, the chairman Niti Aayog between 2017 and 2022. Dr. Kumar is a highly learned individual. He holds two doctorates, so one from Lucknow University and his DPhil is from Oxford. In that sense, is an Oxford trained economist. A very unique person in the sense he comes with the versatility from industry, from academia, and even from the government side. So I'm sure today we will be the direct beneficiaries of all his combined experience through the course of his talk. I'm sure he will bring that flavor to the way this conversation that we make progression. It's literally difficult for me to read out his CV because that's quite a lengthy thing. He has been part of so many organizations. He has shouldered a lot of important responsibilities during his long illustrious career, but few of the highlights that might be relevant and useful for the audience is he has been the chief economist for the CII between 2004 and 6. He has also been the Secretary General for the FICCI between 2010 and 12. He has also been associated with a lot of important high-profile think tank. They advise in framing policies, formulating different initiatives that the government and non-governmental level that taken, including the ICRIER. He has been the director and the CEO of that entity. He is also, most importantly, at some point in time, he was the principal economist at ADB, the Asian Development Bank. It's a multilateral international financial institute. So it's the IMF for our continent, and IMF or World Bank. I don't know whether, honestly, that's something I need to check whether they focus more on the short-term facilities like IMF does, or the development, the long-term thing what World Bank does. I think it's a mix of both. Till 95 to 2005, it's a 10 long years. I think there are very few people who have manned that office for such a long time. So that's a testament to his the expertise in the field. He has been part of the Central Board of Reserve Bank of India. He has been nominated to the Board of State Bank of India, and there are many other organizations that viewers, you are most welcome to look at his page and you will get a sense that who are we going to listen today. He has also been the chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics, and it's a very, again, a very prestigious research institute that's in this part of the country. It's in Pune. It was co-founded by the legendary fighter Gokhale. He is the founding director of Pehle India Foundation. It's a non-profit public policy think tank. They do a lot of work in the space of consumer, public health, and so many other impactful areas that I'm sure we will try and get a sense that how has been his experience. This coming to his notable achievements, he has been very. I mean, there are many, but I think the one thing that caught my eyes is the recipient of the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold and Silver Star of Japan, and that is more to recognize his contribution to strengthen the Indo-Japan economic relation. He authored several books, and one such book I would like to quote here. He wrote, I think it was published in 2016. It is Modi and his Challenges. Obviously, in the paucity of time, we may not talk much about his book unless he chooses to tell us something about that book. And this is absolutely his discretion. Shifting the gear, the spirit of the conversation is not just to answer straight to the question that we have. You are absolutely at liberty to design your thought process. And I think these all are words of wisdom for us. So there is a great level of enrichment, incitement that's going to occur to us. So therefore, please don't present yourself with the question that we frame. And with this prelude, sir, we get into the conversation that we intend to have today. Sir, you are someone who is little unconventional from your peers in the sense not everyone like you has been closely so deeply involved with academics, industry, and also government, and for a long time. It is not that you have been at one of them and then you've quickly switched. That's not how it is. You've sustained all those positions, and I'm sure with this diverse experience, that would have definitely shaped your understanding and supplement your strong academic pedigree that you have gathered in the context of economic landscape for India. I just now I refer to one of your interview, that's a Business World interview, where you emphasize triple bottom line, that is people, planet, profit. So how can policymaker and business effectively integrate this into the strategies out of because you have been part of both sides. So these three things, when you say, so how they can be a cohesion and there's going to be a collaboration between the two stakeholders, sir?
Yeah. Hi, Sachin. Glad to be on your channel, and congratulations for doing so well on this channel. And thank you for the introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think first I should explain as to why I have been a rolling stone, but who has gathered some moss. It's not that normally you say a rolling stone like me from one place to the other gathers no moss, but I've had some moss. And and why is that happening? Because I think this is because my kind of inner urge to keep learning at every time. Whenever I've been in a job for a few years, then there's always been the urge to look at some other aspect. Now the explanation is that with ICRIA, and I came back from Oxford, and my person whom I consider my mentor is Dr. K.B. Lal, an ICS officer who used to be India's Commerce Secretary and Defense Secretary, and also India's ambassador to the EU twice. I worked with him for 5 years, and I learned a lot. And from what I learned from him, one of the things was that you got to be rooted in the practical reality. Therefore, to be rooted in the practical reality, you couldn't just sort of fly away on your academic journey. You got to be sort of rooted there. And second thing that I learned from him was that you have to learn to look at every problem or every aspect from many different dimensions, from many different directions. So which is why after 5 years in a career, I became a professor at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, and then I joined the government. I was the economic advisor in the Ministry of Finance with Dr. Manmohan Singh when he was the finance minister, and from 91 to 95. So, it's a great learning period. But having done that, and then I went to Manila, and there I saw the opportunity of a broader canvas, which was the Asian Development Bank. So I joined there, remained for 10 years, and then was able to work on China and Central Asia. But after that, when I was leaving for the Asian Development Bank, Dr. Manmohan Singh told me, "You must go, but do come back to India." So I took retirement from the ADB before my retirement age and came back to India in 2004. And also because my father at that stage, 86-year-old, told me that he can't travel to Manila any longer. So therefore, I decided to come back and look after him. So all of these circumstances actually made me go from one place to the other. And then, of course, Niti Ayog, I'm grateful to the Honorable Prime Minister. You mentioned the book. I thought that once I've written that book, then maybe, I don't know, but he saw the honesty of the book, etc. So I became. So now, all of that, having done that, my thing on people, profit, and planet, it is that India, we have to recognize, we have to notice very carefully that India is the only country in the world history which has to keep growing its income levels and its welfare levels, and also to reduce the carbon footprint at the same time. So therefore, you have to take care of the people. You have to take care that the corporates make reasonable profit, good profit, but also the planetary boundaries are not violated, because if they are, there's only one planet that in which we're living, and that will sort of, and we'll pay the price for it. So it is not for any other reason. I give you just two examples. If the sea levels rise by about 6 inches, refugees into our country, which is not going to be sustainable. On the other hand, the second example, if the Himalayan snow peaks continue to gather more carbon, the melt rate of the glaciers will keep increasing. Already, some of our biggest glaciers are receding at about 18 meters per day. And if that keeps happening at any big rate, then the perennial nature of our rivers will be threatened. So, because it is for our own existence, it's an existential question for us that we have to take care of both of all the three things: people, profit, and planet. And I think this is the triple bottom line with Yogi Deveshwar, the former chairman of ITC and CII, used to also mention. And now we as a people have to become aware of that. We can't just do one dimensional growth. We have to take care of all the three. It's not easy. It's a big challenge. And so we have to start thinking differently and being more innovative in our approach to how we handle economic policy and social policy in this country.
Absolutely, sir. I think it's a great start. It's a great start. To very, very quick reaction. You took the name of late Vaishya Vishwar. This happened. ITC happens to be my second organization that I work for a brief period between 2006 and 8, and he used to be the chairman at that point in time. Yes, absolutely. So the economy ecology coexistence has been one of the pronounced ways of life in ITC. Very importantly, you introduced in your typical modest way to what made you to continue your learning. I think we all believe that never stop learning because life doesn't stop teaching us a lesson. And what really what was profound from your response is it is not just your classroom learning. I think the learning gets complete. I mean, though it's a process, I think it gets more and more mature, robust when you are more rooted to the ground reality. And just to borrow the term, absolutely, that's very resonating. People who are not been part of field, uh, they are. I mean, they have scope to improve. I think this is something which exactly we wanted to learn because you have been a part of that 91, the first ever formal economic reform that India embarked on, and you were the advisor in the finance ministry. And in that LPG reform, privatization remains an important pillar, and you've been one of the value statement of that program was to encourage the private participation, and you very nicely in a very just and logical way. You said they are commercial organizations, so by nature, so they have to make reasonably or good profit for them to sustain. At the same time, they cannot violate and disrupt the nature because everything flows from there. So there's no way we can afford to. Already enough disruption have been done. It's time to protect and improve. With this, sir, we move on to our next issue. That's about the India and the global South. Uh, in your as a reference in your South China Morning Post, global South gaining in prominence, and that's pretty much echoing the world view. There's a very few who will deny that, and especially the discussions around trade, climate action, and even the economic cooperation. How do you see, sir, India positioning itself as a leader while balancing the domestic priorities? Because that is something which we can't afford to dilute just because we are part of global programs, especially in forums like BRICS and the G20. So, and just as an extension of this, I mean, again, in the same article, you said India could emerge as a key part driving global cooperation post COVID. Uh, have recent because there have been a shift in the power balance. So, have recent geopolitical shifts strengthened or challenged that trajectory, sir?
Yeah. Sachi, I think we should start by looking at India's own history of non-alignment from the very beginning. India refused to join any camp, whether the Soviet camp or the American camp, and said that we will be non-aligned and we'll work with the developing countries. So from the very beginning, I mean, that's the start. Then we supported the formation of UNCTAD. We formed a group of what is called the G77, and then we had the non-aligned movement is also a movement of the global South. So India has been championing the cause of global South for decades now, for ever since its independence. We have seen, and many countries have also been sort of have been inspired by our own independence movement and our own economic development, and I think they have followed suit, whether it's in Asia or in Africa. Now, I think at this point of time, India is already a member of all major groupings of the global South, whether it's the BRICS or it is SCO or it is BIMSTEC. It is all there. They're all there. G20 is a separate issue because it has both advanced and developing countries. But I think at this point of time, at this conjuncture, India now needs to demonstrate its ability to remain a democracy and also grow rapidly and take care of its people at the lowest decile of the population, at the bottom of the pyramid. So basically, what I'm saying is that India has to now make sure that its a philosophy of a vibrant democracy, of taking care of the of Antyodaya, that's the last bottom of the pyramid, and taking care of the planet following our philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So I think all these three pillars, now is the time for India to ensure, demonstrate that we'll be successful in doing this, that in the next 20, 30 years, we will achieve all these three things as we go forward. Why am I saying that? Is that it is through this that we will serve the biggest purpose of the global South, because then those people can take our example, we can serve as an exemplar, and we can then talk to the other countries in the global South following this model, which is very different, which will have to be very different from the model of growth followed by either the US or Europe, the colonial Europe, or even China, who have only looked after only one dimension, only the growth, and not the democracy and not the planet. So we have the ability to look after all the three dimensions, especially if our industry, government, and academia and civil society agree to come to work together, which we have been able to do to a major extent. So the role for India at the moment in the global South is to demonstrate that we can achieve all these things together, and that if we come to that, and I am now part of something called the Africa Asia Network, and which is that these two big continents, the continents of the future, where the average age is much lower than everywhere else, they will work together to ensure that the poorest of the people their welfare levels are improved, and at the same time, the planetary boundaries are maintained and respected. I think that's the real role that India can play now. And at the same time, we must recognize that India has never ever has never had any ambition in its millennia of history, never created any colonies or any empires or done any aggression on any other country. Our culture is spread from Red Sea to Jakarta, and there are findings now more and more all these in Indian sphere, but never with arms, only through the power of demonstration of what we can achieve and what we have done. So I think that's what is required today, and I'm sure the way we are going, we'll be able to do that.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful. I think very empowering messages, and it's really a strong conviction and the inspiration that we draw from our culture, our heritage. We have never been expansionist. We never believed in exploiting others or extracting the source from elsewhere. Rather, we may not have had a so-called template of refugee policy, but I think India has a history of distinction of embracing people who have elsewhere been persecuted or who have been threatened, their existence have been threatened. Economically, we're doing so wonderful. I think anyway, the things have changed, world has moved on. But I think all your are converging to one point that how do we become climate conscious and we start respecting nature without further delay because the enough warning. I mean, because this is an area where enough has been talked about. I think time to act, and at the same time, we're deeply optimistic about the way as a country the way we're moving ahead. And just as a corollary, we have committed that by 2070 we will be net zero, though that is not specifically that we're talking about. But I think while we're good 45 years away, programs have to be designed keeping that in mind. And we also recognize that different countries have different levels of growth they have achieved. So therefore, for us, first before we start climbing down, we have to motion of the emission. So in that sense, but at the same time, our growth cannot be drifted out from the green agenda. We have to ensure that we are growing, but the green ticks are in place. So it's a bit delicate thing, but with the proper planning and commitment in place, I think we'll get there. So now we move to the next issue that we wanted to pick up with you. That's about the collaboration between industry and government. It is again an extension of something you already discussed. That is, it's not lessons, rather it's your experience from both the two most prominent frontline industry bodies, that is SHA and or rather you have always been an advocate that the private sector investment post 91 has gone up steadily, but there is scope for more uh, participation from that end. And you have been technically the insider of the industry because when you were part of FICCI and CII, so you are one of the finest person to give the industry view on it. And in the sense, how did you see their evolution post 91 reforms, which you have been a very important part of the 91 reforms as well as from the industry side being in these two roles? One of the important things that you said that the government and industry must work together. However, what are the distinct roles? The work of the other. So how, in your view, sir, this partnership be strengthened to accelerate manufacturing and job creation, which is the larger issue today? I know it's a more of thematic thing. There's no specific point that we want to deal with here. So basically, how this collaboration, in your view, should improve?
I think, Savisachi, it is important to remember that for thousands of years, it has been the private entrepreneur in India, the private businessman, the private trader, the private manufacturer, who has made India as great as it has been. In first century AD, according to Angus Madison, who wrote a report for OECD, in first century AD, India's share of the world economy was 30%. And even who made that? Who created that big economy? It was the private sector. There was no government doing that. So I think it is important to remember that India's growth, India's prosperity will be brought about by the private sector. Now, there was a change of the direction after the 50s, because Pandit Nehru was very impressed with Soviet Union and he thought that there will be socialism and central planning and that government can do this role instead of the private sector. And because at that time, despite the fact, if you remember, that the first steel mill in the country and in Asia was set up by Tata in Jamshedpur. And the fact that also Ghanshyam Das Birlaji was a nationalist in the national movement and he had created all the big industries in jute and textiles already at that time. So there was a private sector. But despite that, we took that other route. I think it is important at this time to completely reverse that era of the 60s, 70s, and 80s and make the private sector the focus of our growth and the centerpiece of our growth. So, according as the Prime Minister has said in his speech, I think on August 15, 2023, we need to eliminate, and if not eliminate, minimize the regulatory and licensing burden on the private sector. What has happened over the last many decades is that the government has seen its role as being the regulator and the supervisor of the private sector to catch those people who are not doing the right thing. And in that process, the whole regulatory burden has become so much that, as Manish Sabharwal has pointed out, and as the Prime Minister quoted, that there are 67,000 regulatory and compliance burden on the private sector. This has to change completely. And what has to replace it is a clear government philosophy that they will support the private sector in every which way possible in going forward and becoming globally competitive, in putting up industries which are globally competitive, which can export as much as possible. Because that is the way now, with the government and industry working seamlessly on a basis of complete trust with each other, that both are working for the nation, both are working for the people. I think that will be achieved. In most of the countries, this is done, whether it is Japan or China or Germany or the US for that matter. We have to now achieve that. And the other part of it is that the industry has to recognize that it has to follow certain norms, some practices, which are standard operating procedures everywhere, and not to cut corners, so that they can assure the government that they will be following the right path and following the standard operating procedures, so that this trust-based relationship can be created. I've observed this from both sides, from the industry side as well as on the government side. People are scared of talking to each other in an honest, real manner. We are always sort of like shadow boxing. We are trying to, sort of do things, etc. Please, that time is gone, because our requirement today is, as again, that we have to grow at 8, 9, 10% for the next 3 decades for our young population, for our aspiring young population to get what it wants. And to grow at that rate, 8, 9, 10%, you need this close coordination, but not just between actually industry and government, which is necessary, but also between industry, government, academia, and civil society. All of us have to come together. And for that, I think the start has to be made by industry and government working together. Now, here, what we have found is, and now this is the Pehle India Foundation, that this is much better achieved at the state government level, at the state level. Because pan India, it doesn't mean anything, because real action and real government industry relationship happens at the state level. So therefore, what we are saying is that we are working that in each state, you have to make a list of all the regulations that you have, and make out as to how many are redundant, how many are not needed, how many can be done away with, and start there. And then, even more so, the platform that I was talking about of the industry, government, academia, and civil society can be created at the level of the district. The district in India is the size of small European countries, with 3 million people in each district. And each district has a lot of local resources, its own geography, its own uniqueness, etc. And at that level, what you can achieve is what I call short-term accountability of the government and the industry. The long-term accountability of the government is done through our democratic process. Every 5 years, the people say, okay, you've done well, not done well, etc. But what about the short-term accountability? If you have announced a target, who is going to make sure that this is going to be achieved? This can be done at the district level. So what you need, therefore, is to start rethinking the governance model, not top down, but bottom up. And if you can do that, I think we'll achieve this relationship between the government and industry, which is critical. Without that, we cannot go anywhere. If we keep sort of mistrusting each other, if we keep looking out for the black sheep and therefore punishing all those who are there, then we'll grow at 6%. 6%, we are growing. 6.5% will grow. We will be the fastest growing economy, but not good enough for our young demographic that we have today. And that is why we need to raise that level to 8 and 9%. On that, you need this change in both the industry and the government. There's one last thing, which is that without industry and government working together, you will never be able to take care of your environment, because it will somehow, and environment has become a real issue today. I mean, the water scarcity that we talk about, or the air quality that we are talking about, these are realities. And so therefore, we need to get this model together. And once we achieve that, India can really be a real example of all the other countries in the South. And I think it is in our capability to be able to do it. And I'm sure that's the way we'll go.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, sir. Sir, in your initial briefing, you remembered Dr. Singh, who we lost recently, Indian Express, the paper I happened to read. I saw the plethora of economists, including you, who remember Dr. Singh, what has been his role. I think you have acknowledged what exactly you just said here, that he is one of the persuaded you to take up that, because you were in a half mind whether to move to Manila. For the country, we realized it, and formally in 1991 we said the playbook that we are not doing enough to lift the people out of poverty, and that is where the template was on date, and a new playbook, an important part of those that reforms. And that is where it was very interesting, and it was relevant for us to hear from you that or you still believe that that is going to be the flavor, because I think the understanding that I get from you, and it was pretty much in the line of expectation, that industry continues to have a very profound role in building this country. That's a very meaty response from you, sir. With this, we sort of move to one of your most favorite area, that is agriculture. Sir, agriculture traditionally, the way it is perceived has changed. It is no longer confined only to the farming per se. It is more inclusive today. It has a broader definition. When I say expansion, it includes the allied activities, even the deployment of the soft power in that sector. So, in your how as a country we redefine our agriculture policies to move beyond the traditional farming and promote the agri-tech, the sustainable practices, and even the very export-oriented, smart, value chains.
Sabyasachi, you raised I think probably the most important issue in our conversation, which is Indian agriculture. Now, you said also that you have to kind of redefine agriculture to include horticulture and fisheries and poultry and allied activities, and also the agro-processing aspect of the agriculture. Only 10% of our agricultural output is processed today. In America, that is 73%. And therefore, if we process the agriculture in a nice way, then we can add value, and we can add also to the farmer's income. But the most important part of agriculture today, Sabyasachi, is that we have the agricultural sector has to provide our food security, our ecological security, and our health security, all three. Now, why do I say this? I say this because we have achieved I was in school when the Bihar famine happened in 1967. So I remember the days when we used to talk about living from ship to mouth, because the US will give us the grains, and we would then only be able to, and we used to miss a meal, as Lal Bahadur Shastri said. We have come a very long way. We have now more than 250 million tons of grain output 70 million tons of our stock in grain. So there's no danger at all of food security as such. We have conquered it through our green revolution, through the greater use of chemical fertilizers and all of that. Now, having done that, we have now come to what is called, what to me looks at the end of that road. That green revolution road, I think we have come to the end of it. Because if we follow that same path in the next 30 years, then we will neither achieve food security nor ecological security. Why am I saying that? Is that the output, the return on fertilizer has declined from 20 kilograms to I think now 12 kilograms in the last 4 decades. So you have to keep using more and more and more and more fertilizer to get the same output. Now, what that means is that for more fertilizer, you need more water, to dissolve it. And all that water comes from the groundwater. And today, 90% of our water, according to the Central Water Commission, is already used in agriculture. And our groundwater, probably 98% is used in agriculture. And we are a water stressed economy already. Some of our cities are facing that in a big way. So agriculture has to change its model of development. And therefore, for the last 4 years, 5 years actually, I've been very strongly propagating the switch to zero chemical agriculture, what is called natural farming, what is called prakritik kheti, and what is sometimes known as the zero budget natural farming. Because I think what has happened, unless we do that, we will not be able to even provide the food security in our country. Because why? Because there is an institute in Bhopal called the Institute of Soil Sciences, established by the British in 1865. They tell us that in India, the carbon content of the soil, which is what makes the soil fertile, was 2.5% in 1947. 1.5% carbon content is required to keep the soil fertile, because all the microorganisms, all the microbiome, all the creatures like earthworm, they grow only when there is carbon in the soil, because that's what makes the soil a living soil. Today, our national average is 0.3%. And therefore, what that means is that we have converted almost our entire land into a non-arable land. And our land is in the ICU. How do we change that? And the only way to change it is to start thinking in terms of not using chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, etc., and replace it not by cow manure, no, not by organic manure, no, but very scientific techniques that have been brought up by people like Subhash Palekar and by Fukuoka and other who are using biochemical biofertilizers, not inorganic fertilizers, who are using other techniques, of using cow-based inputs, etc. Because and that process is now very much on way in India. 22 to 25 lakh farmers are using that already, to good effect. So, why? So that's about the food security. Ecological security, I already hinted at, because there will be water shortage otherwise. The soil will become degraded, and then there will be more and more carbon in the atmosphere, so that environmental security will also be finished. And then the health security. When you have apple that is grown, which has got 16 sprays of chemicals on it, and you and I eat it, you can imagine what happens to our health. And then also the farmer who is using all the urea quite unregulated manner, what happens to his or her health. There is now a so-called cancer train which runs from Bhatinda to Bikaner with all the farmers in it, because they are exposed to all these chemicals. So even the health security will not be guaranteed. So therefore, in agriculture, and today our agriculture employs 45% of our workforce and produces only 18% of the GDP. So that you can imagine that the productivity level from other sectors is much, much lower. And that is what causes agricultural distress, the farmer distress, etc. So we also raise agricultural productivity at the same time. So therefore, you have to use scientific and technology techniques, like, for example, sensors for the amount of water that you're using, or sensors for the carbon, etc., that we can use, or the Israeli techniques of hydroponic or greenhouse cultivation. All of this has to come together to make agriculture a science-driven, non-chemical based agriculture sector. And if you grow this and then process this, then the farmer's income can increase manyfold. And at the same time, if you go for non-chemical agriculture, there is now clear evidence that the carbon content increases. So the farmer can get the carbon credit, and that has become an additional crop for him because he will get that credit. Finally, here, what is happening is that we need to collect a huge amount of evidence that non-chemical farming is workable, is feasible across all the agroclimatic zones of the country. We have 15 agroclimatic zones and 77 sub-agroclimatic zones. We need to collect scientific evidence from all these zones to show that natural farming or zero chemical farming will not cause incomes and yield to decline, but will in fact improve the farmers' lives and also the lives of the consumer. So we need a paradigm shift in agriculture. I am very happy to see that the Prime Minister, I think on the 22nd, 21st November 2021, when he was addressing, I think, Irma or Anand, actually made an appeal to all the people, all the farmers, to start think of adopting this. And again, in his 15th August address, he again made the appeal to say that we should think about rewarding those who look after the Mother Earth. And it is in our tradition, it is the Mother Earth that we look after. Just one last, which is what you need to do is to start incentivizing all those farmers who are not using chemical fertilizers in the same way that you subsidize all the farmers who use chemical fertilizers. 2.5 lakh crore goes into chemical fertilizer subsidy. If some of that can be brought to the farmers who are using natural farming, I think the farmers will be incentivized to switch their practices and make it into a national movement, which is needed.
Interesting. So very substantive. I think very interestingly, you refer to the PL 420 scheme that was US as a food for peace. I think dynamic today we are talking about what US is doing to the rest of the world. One of the theme of reciprocal tariff. And, you made a lot of critical little before you referred to a district hub. The smaller the unit, better the governance. While in a federal structure, the union and the state, they have different role in accordance with the scheme of the constitutional provisions, but at the same practically things to move. I think even the constitutional framework, they recognize that, particularly in the context of reforms, the state have a major role play. So except finance, I think rest all in the factor market, the rest of the state. But it's just that the way we have preferred to see ourselves as a country that is the center which enjoys more powers, which is politically not correct. At the same time, it's also held accountable for everything that goes wrong. And it also assumes the credit that everything good happens. So therefore, in that context, the short point is it is the states who have to now pull their weights, and now the center has a very constructive role. I think this government in that sense has done series of steps that have been taken, and they're very quite, I'm able to link it to all the major points that you made, whether it is Antodaya or the last man in the row, or even the particularly from COVID and thereafter, when we have seen 80 crore plus families vulnerable, the marginalized section. So they have been continuously, without break, they have been given the support for their sustenance. I think these are very wonderful gestures because, as you rightly said, as a country, while officially we may not like to call ourselves as a socialist country when it comes to the way we run our economy, but at the same time, we are not an out and out Western economy that follows a playbook that all our policies are devoid of people who feel otherwise disenfranchised. Coming to the farmers, I think that's a very emotive issue for a country like us. A lot of emotions attached to it, India or rural India. Somewhere or other, we have roots to the community farmers and the places where these activities take place. Very nicely, sir, you covered it. How, what are the pain points, and how do we sort of mitigate? But I think that distinct thing, what you said, that really I found it very resonating, and that's a pragmatic way to go forward. Can be applied even here. The district can be the nodal center where that can be the touch point from both sides, from the government as well as from the farmer side. And as you rightly said, it's a bottom up. It's no longer top down. Top down, yes, that's to drive a culture, to set a tone, but the real work happen always on the ground. That's a very important point that you made. I think this is what happens when we engage with people of vast and versatile experience like yours. Sir, we move on and I won't say love, but the currently what consumes most of your time, organization that you had, that you started. The theme is Healthy India. It's a consumer trade and public health, because health is something which I think with the rising middle class and the increasing health consciousness, so this is no longer a in our way of life. There is a recent work with Feline Foundation that highlights consumer behavior and the health trends, right? And we just said post 91 reform again played a key. India's rising middle class that has led to a very increase. Do you see there is scope for policy interventions that are needed to ensure affordable health and nutrition and preventive measures? Because the fact that we are one of the fastest growing major economy, where a country with the whole world looks up, remain a bright spot, not just in the emerging world, but even globally when we sort of benchmark ourselves with the process. But at the same time, there are red flags, particularly like you said, there are a large section of our population, they need help, they need support. Even one major medical bill that can push somebody to the BPL category, to the below poverty line. And that is not something to sensationalize anything or we are at a very vulnerable, but that's a fact, that's a reality that it's hard to deny. So do you see any policy intervention that still can be done where this the healthcare will be more affordable? India has the distinction of becoming the world pharmacy. So every third vaccines that is administered anywhere in the world that goes from India. I mean, the largest quantity of drugs they're manufactured, that's supplied by the country, that is India. But at the same time, we as a country, we can't call it is really affordable for everyone. So that is so the access to the quality health. There are policies in place. There are continuous initiatives, measures by different stakeholders. But at the same time, government, which we are just talking right now, at a policy level, do you see there is scope to do more?
It's a very important issue, of course, because our health indices don't are still not that good as it will be, whether it's child mortality or infant mortality or maternal anemia in the women, etc., as brought out by the National Family Health Survey, the last one, the fifth one. And I think in this regard, in my view, the Ayushman Bharat scheme that has been launched by India, by the government, which gives you the health insurance for up to 5 lakh of rupees for every family, for the bottom 500 million, 50 crore people. I think also further up to cover also the middle class. And I believe the government is already thinking of that. So that if that happens, and then slowly as the fiscal situation permits, the 5 lakh can be increased to 10 or 20 lakh, the higher amount of health insurance that can be given for the people. So I think that's a very big step that we've taken for improving the public health situation of India. The second aspect of that, I think, again, I think you'll appreciate, Sabitachi, that the entire campaign of Swachh Bharat by the Prime Minister of building these toilets in the homes, about, I forget now how many, 17 crore toilets that have had a very good impact on women's health, and that is quite clear. So but then the overall theme of Swachh Bharat, which looks at sanitation at the same time and cleaning the rivers, removing the plastics, also will have a good solid impact on public health. And the third scheme is that Har Ghar Mein Jal, Har Ghar Mein Nal, Nal Se Jal, because a large amount of disease in this country is waterborne. It's diarrhea or typhoid or and so on. Is large, and that is because of drinking unclean, unhygienic water. So if you get tap water, and then if you can also use it to have better water treatment plants, etc., that will also be eliminated. So these are three very big steps that the government has taken. this health sector is a state government subject. I think that is what must be remembered. And the state governments, therefore, it is their primary responsibility to improve the health in their state. Now, here again, the role of the ASHA workers is extremely important. Institutionalized delivery and the follow-up of the child. Now, the ASHA workers schemes, I think, can be a lot more strengthened, and therefore here what we need to do is to strengthen the role of the self-help groups of the women. I forget now, but there are, I think, 4 crore self-help groups in the country, and they are helping in many ways, financial inclusion also. So why not help the self-help groups to look after the ASHA worker? This is where I think a new kind of public-private partnership is required. And we tried that when I was in Niti, which is to say for nourishment and for child nourishment and women nourishment, we said, let the civil society organizations work with the government machinery. So the government machinery has the resources, has the funds, and the civil society organization can improve the delivery, the last mile delivery of those resources. Now that's the key because the last mile delivery is where a lot leaves to be desired. And then, as you were saying earlier, if you do the district-based development model, this can be improved in a major way. Whether it's a delivery of public health, or it's a delivery of public education, school education, or it is sanitation, or it is Swachhata, all of that can be made much more effective at the district level, and then and I have learned this from the Prime Minister's aspirational district program. So we selected 112 aspirational or the backward district, and we wanted to make it come up the average. So that is what we can do. So that is, I think. So finally, I think there is a role here for the private health providers to look at their own practices, because I think that is important. I think a doctor is next to God, and that is the credibility that we have grown up with. But that credibility is now being questioned. And I don't like the idea, personally speaking, of private equity investors who are private equity investors investing in the health area. But then the only indicator remains the profit making, how much profit they can make. Health is not a sector, or education for that matter, where profit can be the only criteria. Yes, it can be one of the criteria, but at the same time, all the other criteria of patient safety, of patient satisfaction, of looking after as a guardian, I think all of those are also important. I think those are my suggestions about improving public health. And one other, sorry, I'm to take your time because I did that also when I was in
No,
Niti Aayog,
absolutely. Go on, sir. Go on, sir. The idea
is
is to
to
listen to you.
mainstream in a big way the role of Ayurveda and our traditional medicines in our country. Today, at the moment, Ayurveda or Unani or Siddha are considered inferior to the so-called modern medicine. Is complete nonsense. In my own experience, I can tell you that I have benefited more from Ayurveda and homeopathy than from modern medicine. But we have not been able to mainstream that. We had made a big effort when I was there, and I think that effort needs to be continued because we all, even the modern so-called doctors, they use Ayurveda family remedies at home, but they will not be prepared to. And one suggestion here that was made by, I think, Mr. Dr. Nagendra, who is the head of S. Vyasa, the Swami Vivekanand Yog Sansthan. He was earlier in NASA, and he made that one suggestion is that to make medical education a combined course of modern and traditional medicine for the first 2 years for everybody to study both those things. And then third year they choose whether they want to go to Ayurveda or to modern medicine or to Unani. That will remove this big distinction. And I think that is the breakthrough that we require in this country to improve our public health and to make it more resource effective. For the same money, cover a large number, much more of the people and the health remedies.
Very expanded response, and the takeaway is the modern education system, not just health. If I may, with your permission, I would say the modern education has redefined, has transferred every branch of learning. It's not just health, and I would agree. But that is something because the issue was health we're talking about, you're referring to that. So there's enough scope to unite, to combine the ancient and the modern thing so that the contemporary things, not everything that we don't need, but at the same time we cannot completely junk our original systems and structure, but more focus on the smaller unit that is in terms of governance. I think that again reminds us of the Gandhi's original, that Gram Swaraj idea. The India lives in villages, so therefore they should be the center of governance. It is not the national capital or the state capital. There are certain sectors which some feel that is best profit element gets subdued. But then the privatization and the profit making, they have their own overlapping nature. Discerning person would have done it. So thanks for it, sir. We move into the last segment of the conversation. That's about the labor reform. 91 reform addressed many things that had trade and finance reforms. So mostly on the capital side, investment and the deregulations, so the delicensing, what I mean. But the labor reform is an area that is something which was not explicit part of the reform, and particularly last few decades has been known for work on that front. As we speak, I think the labor, if my information is correct, all the states yet to come back with a harmonized unified labor code that roll out. And narrow down labor reform, when I say specifically we're referring to the informal sector challenges. Multiple economic reforms that this country has seen, has witnessed. At the same time, a large section of India's informal workforce, that remains vulnerable. They feel disenfranchised, largely because they feel either they don't have job, or the kind of job that they get to do is to the safer zone, because they don't feel that they feel continuously feel threatened. The fear of losing job is something which makes them nervous. So, in your view, sir, what do you think is the biggest structural barriers and preventing their integration into the formal economy? Because whatever we have done, and particularly I'm referring to this government, I mean the NDA 2, there are a series of steps that have been taken where there has been a pattern, there has been a very conscious effort to move our economy towards a more formal, because the essential character of Indian economy has never been so formal as it is today. Whether it is in the space of financial inclusion, or even the jam trinity we call it, or even the direct bank transfer, or even the digital footprint has taken to an unprecedented scale. The tax regime that we have today, it is not just progressive and mature, it's filled with trust and certainty in the way it is interpreted, the way it is understood, the way it is communicated, the way it is administered, but also the way it enables the overall economic landscape. So, in your view, now with all this in an AI-driven automation that is reshaping industries, how can India absorb its informal workforce uh, in the new digital economy? And do you see that there is a need for us to push for a universal social security system? Because when majority of the people on the workforce, what you call, I'm using them interchangeably, if they're in a state of despair or a struggle, so that is not a good indicator for the country. And we are not, I'm not referring to any political connotation or what critics are, or people who oppose the government's policies on this front. I'm not relying on their views, even otherwise as a country, because our demography, like you said, that is what we take pride in. They're our biggest asset, biggest strength. So how do you think that they can be more integrated to a formal economy, sir?
I mean, Sabsachi, you must first realize that only 10% of our workforce is in the formal sector. About 90% is in the informal sector. The entire agriculture sector is informal sector. Then there's a large part of services sectors in the informal sector. So I'm pointing this out to say the enormity of the problem, the enormity of the problem that exists. Now here, by the way, the many starts have been made to codify the labor laws. and there was a very substantial movement because we have something like, I forget, I mean, something more than 300 minimum wages in the country. And every state has a different set of laws and minimum wages and apprenticeship and so on. All of that has to be codified, and the government had announced that they are bringing to have 4 labor codes, which will take care of, which will harmonize all of this and bring it together. Something has happened and it's not moved, I think, as fast as it can.
So the
So that
states,
needs.
the center is awaiting the states to by 31st of March was the extended deadline for the states to come back with the rules.
Okay, so in which case, I hope it will happen soon, and that all these 4 full codes will be in place and codified, and that will help a lot. The other thing that the government has done is to open this e-Shram portal for all the informal sector workers to register themselves and link their registration with their Aadhaar card, so that now they have an identity on the board. And I'm not mistaken, but I think maybe about uh, close to 20 crore people have registered on this sector. Now, what you can do, therefore, the next thing that can happen from this e-Shram sector is, and with the Aadhaar card already, and you can now link it to their bank account, you can have a minimum wage being present, like you said, social security is essentially what you can do is what is called the basic income concept. That a basic income can be declared for all of those people who are there on the Shram portal. Now, that will, however, mean that the wage levels in this country will have to rise, and for generally, and that may not be a bad thing at all, in my view, because if the wage levels rise, then as a result of that, the disposable income will go up, the consumption will go up, and the economy can grow faster. And with the wage level rising, the investors will also have to invest more in to keep up, to raise the productivity levels. So they'll have to bring in newer machines and newer things, etc. So I think that is a reform waiting to be done, how to make a social security floor for all the workers, whether you are in the formal sector or the informal sector. That's the other part. Secondly, on the labor reform thing is that you have to increase the participation rates of both the men and especially the women. Now, the women rates have come up somewhat in the last, now it's 41% from 27%, but still half the women are not participating in your workforce. And even in men, the participation rate is very low compared to the other countries. I think it is about 58%, while in China and other countries it's more than 80%. Why is that happening? Because people have stopped looking for employment. And there's a very large category in this country of so-called self-employed people. Now, all those people sitting under the tree, or your kawadi wala, coming around in the morning to gather your waste, etc., they're all self-employed. But these people, they are living at very low levels of. So if you declare a minimum wage for all of them, maybe these may be available to come into the formal workforce. So this is it on the labor reforms. I think they are very, very much needed, and some steps have been taken already. But the states have also got to move to make sure that all their workforce receives the social security and the their skills availability, so that the workforce is also employable. At the moment, there is also a big problem there, and that's connected to your education and vocational skill sector. But I think we will come around to that. It's a major issue in our country, and the sooner we can give it the needed attention, the better off we will be.
Absolutely, thank you. I think nobody can assume a better position than you, because being the helm of Niti Aayog, that is the most powerful body which formulate the policies to drive the cooperative federalism, that is the soul of our constitution. So, in the state empowerment has been at the fulcrum of what you do, and today even what you said, you made it a point that the state has a very important role that often gets overlooked in our day-to-day conversation, because today we're so much ingrained into relating to everything that India means. We refer to the union government. While that's fact, the government of India has a primacy over the state, but state also has very sensible role play. So this brings us to an end of an incredibly thought-provoking conversation with you, sir. from policy reforms and India's global positioning to future of agriculture, industry, and workforce transformation. You have, as always, you have stayed away from any sort of sensational or controversial points that can be otherwise the mileage can be drawn from. The whole idea was to get insights about India's story. It is uncut, uncensored, and you have been very, very candid. And as always, it has been the enlistment level has been great. It's given us not just a deep insights into the country's evolving economic landscape. You have also laid down a very, very pragmatic, practical way forward playbook that we all should follow. And the biggest takeaway today, I think, the focus and the centerpiece has been the district level, or basically the smaller unit that enables a better and more effective governance. One important thing, I think, this government, this the current government, when they took over, they have formally come up with the Ministry of Cooperation. So that also, in some point in time, I know you made a passing reference to some IRMA event. I think the cooperative is again at the focus of the government is being renewed through an exclusive ministry, though it is attached to the Home Ministry today. I think there's a national corporate draft is under the chairmanship of Mr. Suresh Prabhu. Issues, thank you, sir. I don't think I can thank you enough, but again, more as a community, sir, sharing your expertise and experience, helping us better understand on the subject. It is always, I mean, one can always, there are a lot of free contents available on the net or we get to read, but nothing can match the experience that we have when we directly engage with you, sir. And to our listeners, for you, we hope you all found this episode insightful. We will keep engaging, sir, and it will be a pleasure to invite you again in one of the sessions that we have. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.